But the bigger question is, why on earth is the Fed raising rates when the U.S. economy is on the brink of recession? When the U.S. economy is hanging by a thread, you don't raise rates in a weak environment. You raise rates when, the economy's hot, unemployment's, lower than it is, but inflation is taking off, things look speculative, and then you raise rates to cool it down a little bit, and then when the market cools down, unemployment goes up, inflation falls, then you ease, then you cut rates. And the Fed never leads the markets. The Fed always follows the markets. The Fed's always working with a lag.
Jim Rickards breaks down the Fed's perplexing move to raise rates amidst economic turmoil, revealing their strategy for the next recession. Delve into the conundrum of rate hikes and cuts and uncover the truth behind global taxation initiatives. Discover why understanding nominal versus real interest rates is crucial for economic decision-making. Tune in for insights on navigating the financial landscape in a world of shifting policies and market dynamics.
So why on earth are they raising rates in a difficult, challenging economic environment? And the answer is they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They are desperately trying to raise rates so they can cut them in the next recession.
Yeah.
The history is that you need to cut rates 300 or 400 basis points, 3 or 4%, in other words, to get the U.S. out of a recession. And typically the way it works is you go into a recession at, 6.5% interest rates. You cut them 3% down to 3.5%, maybe a little more. And then that's enough to get the economy out of the recession. Well, how do you cut 300 basis points when you're only at 25 basis points? Well, you can't, obviously. They're trying to raise rates so they can cut them. I say this is like hitting yourself in the head with a hammer because it feels good when you stop. But the Fed's conundrum is, how do you raise rates enough so that you can cut them in the next recession without causing the recession you're trying to prevent? That's the conundrum. And I think the answer is you can't do it. They're going to cause the recession. The Fed is not neutral when it comes to raising rates. They are biased in favor of raising rates. So it's not the case. When they wake up in the morning, they're not asking themselves, do I want to raise rates? Do I not want to raise rates? What's the data dependent, all this stuff. They wake up and say, I want to raise rates. Can I? In other words, just because they want to raise rates doesn't mean the coast is clear. So I analogize this to a little kid who's trying to steal money from mom's wallet. If mom's looking, they won't take it. But if mom's out in the backyard, they'll go grab some money. So the Fed will raise rates whenever they think they can get away with it. So they want to raise rates. They can't always raise rates if they think things are iffy or the markets don't expect it or financial conditions are already too tight for other reasons. They won't do it. But if the coast is clear, they will. When you throw out a phrase like world taxation, we talked a little bit earlier about world money, the SDR, and the initial reaction on the part of some readers is to roll their eyes and go, well, there goes Jim again with all his crazy conspiracy theories. But these are not conspiracy theories. Again, I make the point. This is very, very important. This is all documented. This is all happening. You can go to these websites. You can attend these meetings. You can look at these working papers. It's all real. Now, as far as world taxation are concerned, we said earlier they love these crazy acronyms that no one understands unless you're expert on all this. But the key phrase here is BEPS, B-E-P-S. That stands for base erosion and profit shifting. So base erosion and profit shifting are the bad things that corporations do to get out of paying taxes. And the governments are going to lead an attack on BEPS, attack on base erosion and profit shifting. And this is all being directed by the G20. And of course, the G20 is this world leadership. It's basically the board of directors of the world. That's the easiest way to describe it. The G20 operates like a board of directors, but they don't have a big staff and directorate. But what they do is they farm out these projects to different existing agencies. It could be the United Nations. It could be the IMF. But we have another group called the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, based in Paris. This is a kind of a rich country's think tank. And the G20 have given the OECD the task of coordinating and implementing BEPS, the BEPS project. And the way it works is, let's say you have an invention, but you invent it in the United States. Well, if you patent that invention and license it for royalties and all those royalties come to the United States, you're going to pay U.S. tax on it. But what if you take the invention and contribute the intellectual property to an offshore company, and then that company then does all the global licensing? And now all the licensing fees go into Dublin instead of Seattle, and you're not paying any tax there because you got a special deal with the Irish government. Well, that's the kind of thing that's going on. Many, many more complicated examples than that, but that's a simple one that that makes the point. The other thing that's done is you mess around with debt equity ratios. So I've got an offshore subsidiary, and instead of giving a capital, I borrow a gazillion dollars from it and pay them interest. Well, what's happening with the interest? Well, it's a deduction in the U.S. and it's income in, say the Bahamas, right? So I get a nice fat tax deduction in the U.S. The money goes to a tax-free jurisdiction like the Bahamas, but I'm just taking it out of one pocket, putting it in the other, right? Because I own both companies. And the corporations are moving this money around so fast that nobody can keep track. So what the governments have decided to do is join forces. And they're going to create this global tax network. And they're going to say to every major corporation, you're going to have a global tax ID, not just your social security number, the corporate equivalent. You're going to have a global tax ID. And all of your subsidiaries are going to have IDs. And all of your transactions are going to have IDs. And all this information is going to be reported to a database to whatever country has jurisdiction. But then all the countries are going to share all the data using this unified ID system and then put it into one giant supercomputer and that everybody can access. So now all of a sudden, Germany's going to be able to see the other side of the trade. They may know that a German corporation is paying interest, but they'll be able to learn that the interest is going to an affiliate in Hong Kong that's not paying any taxes, et cetera. So they're going to have the complete picture. And then once you have the picture, you can attack it. You can use, anti-avoidance provisions. You can use special laws and, Section 269 of the Internal Revenue Code. I mean, they're equivalents all over the world. They have the tools, but what they don't have is the information. Under this BEPS project, they're going to get the information. Then they're going to combine the information and the tools, and then they're going to tax these corporations, and they'll be able to run, but they won't be able to hide. And then they're going to raise the rates. And then a lot of people say, well, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't they pay their fair share? And my answer is, you should pay your fair share, but what's fair? So this is a full-scale assault on the ability of corporations to legally avoid taxes, but it's going to segue into something that's much more punitive, much more extractive. But when you look at interest rates, you have to distinguish between nominal rates and real rates. Now, I'll give you an example. In 1980, I got my first mortgage on a condo in New York, and I paid 13%. And my mother cried. I mean, her first mortgage was like 3%. And here I am paying 13% on mortgage. My mother was upset. She thought that was like a dumb decision. But I said, Mom, I'm paying 13% interest, but inflation is 15% and taxes are 50%. So my after-tax cost of funding is 7, inflation is 15. My real interest rate is -8. The bank is paying me to borrow because I get to pay them back in cheaper dollars. Whereas today, even with, say, a 4% mortgage, if inflation is only 1.5, which it is, that's a positive real rate of 2.5. So when I borrowed at 13%, the real rate was -5. Today, when you borrow at 4.5%, the real rate is +2 or 2.5. So nominal rates are at an all-time low, but real rates are very high. And that's what drives economic decision-making, and that's what drives the economy. And one of the problems that economists and policymakers are wrestling with is how do you get real rates negative? Because that's what stimulates borrowing. If I think I can go borrow money and pay it back in cheaper dollars so that the real cost is negative, I actually get free money from the bank or the bank pays me to borrow. That's what a negative interest rate means. That's supposed to be a prod or a stimulus to more investment, more R&D, and more consumption and more economic activity and higher aggregate demand.
The global economy requires clarity and foresight. Jim Rickards' insights shed light on the enigmatic maneuvers of central banks and the evolving dynamics of taxation. Let's remember that behind the jargon lies tangible impacts on businesses and societies. Let's carry forth an awareness of the intricate mechanisms shaping our economic future.